Okay, let's dive right in. Today we are unpacking a really tense, really fast-moving situation.
Hmm.
And it's one that I think perfectly captures this friction we're seeing between local communities in America
Yeah.
and the federal law enforcement agencies that operate inside them.
Right. It's this constant push and pull.
Yeah, and we're zoning in on Thursday, January 8th, 2026, just a single 24-hour window that saw two huge U.S. cities, Minneapolis and then Portland, become, the backdrop for these separate, very high-stakes shootings involving federal immigration enforcement.
And this is such a critical deep dive for anyone trying to get their head around the current climate. Public accountability, federal authority, all of it.
Right.
Our mission here is to really just cut through the noise, the rhetoric, and focus on the source material we have. We're going to synthesize all these complex layers, the facts, the claims, the political reactions, all centered on what happened in Portland, Oregon.
And we have quite a bit to work with. We have federal statements, local police reports.
We do.
Mhm.
And witness perspectives, which are going to be key. And then the immediate, incredibly sharp political backlash from city leaders. Leaders who, and this is amazing, frankly came right out and said they just don't trust the federal account anymore.
That distrust, that feels like the core thread running through this whole story. When
Yeah.
you look at the source material, especially the reporting from The Guardian and some of the local follow-ups, it just paints this picture of a community that was already raw.
Yeah, raw is a good word for it,
Yeah.
from previous confrontations.
Right.
And now this new incident just pushes them right to the brink.
So the goal for you listening to this is to understand not just what happened, but really why the reaction on the ground in Portland was so fast, so intense, and why it was so deeply rooted in this skepticism about the federal government story.
Exactly. We're going to walk through the minute-by-minute sequence of events in Portland, how the local authorities were left to handle this chaotic aftermath. And then we're going to spend a good amount of time just dissecting the critical differences between the Federal Border Patrol agent's claim of self-defense and the account from a non-law enforcement witness.
And then, crucially, connect it all back to that other event.
Yes, we have to connect this incident to the simultaneous and frankly just as volatile battle over jurisdiction and accountability that was already playing out 1,000 miles away in Minneapolis.
Okay, so let's start there. On the ground, East Portland, that Thursday afternoon.
Right.
And as you said, it's often the case in these chaotic situations, the first reports were just confusing.
Very confusing, which
Mhm.
in itself tells you a lot about the speed and complexity of what went down. The Portland Police Bureau, the PPB, they get a call.
Uh-huh.
And their initial response is to the scene that was first reported, a shooting right outside the Adventist Hospital campus.
Okay, so a hospital, you'd think that's where you'd find the victim.
You would think. But this is where the whole thing gets complicated right away. The shooting might have happened near the hospital, but the victims weren't there.
They were gone.
Gone. The PPB then quickly learns that a man who had been shot is actually calling for help from a totally different location,
How far away?
about 3 miles,
Right.
or 5 kilometers away from that initial hospital campus.
Wow, so hold on. The victims, a man and a woman, whoever they were, they managed to flee the initial scene of the shooting, drive 3 miles, and then they decide to call for help.
Yes. And who do they call?
Local police.
The PPB, not federal authorities.
Ah.
They call the local cops for help from that second distant spot. That fact alone, that immediate 3-mile flight, it already complicates this idea of a simple, straightforward interaction, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. So the PPB responds to this second location. What do they find?
They find the man and the woman. Both have apparent gunshot wounds. And the first priority, before any investigation can really start, is trauma care.
Of course.
Our sources say the responding PPB officers were quick. They applied a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. They called for emergency medical personnel, EMS, and then the patients were transported to the hospital.
So the local police are basically acting as first responders, providing medical aid to people who just fled a federal shooting scene.
That's exactly it.
What did we know right away about how badly they were hurt? The injuries.
Well, in their first public statements, the authorities were very cautious. They said they hadn't confirmed the condition of the injured people.
But something always leaks out.
It always does.
Mhm.
And crucial details were leaked very quickly to local media. Police sources started talking to the Oregonian.
And what did they say?
They said that one person was shot in the leg and the other person had a wound to the chest.
Okay, a shot to the leg versus a shot to the chest. That is a profound difference when you're talking about use of force.
It's a huge difference. A shot to the chest, if that's confirmed, signifies an immediate life-threatening injury. A leg wound is serious, of course, but a chest wound? That suggests the agent fired with the explicit intent to immediately incapacitate or maybe even kill the target.
So it moves the justification for the shooting beyond just, deterrence.
Right. And into the realm of a full-blown lethal response.
And it was only after the local cops found them, stabilized them, got them to a hospital 3 miles away from the original spot.
Yeah.
Only then did the PPB figure out that these 2 people were injured in a shooting involving federal agents.
Yes, specifically U.S. Border Patrol agents.
Which brings us to the first major story we have to dissect, the official federal account of what happened.
And that federal narrative came from Tricia McLaughlin. She's a spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. She confirmed the incident involved U.S. Border Patrol agents who were confusing. They were conducting a targeted operation.
So this wasn't random?
Not at all. They had stopped a vehicle because they were looking for a specific person, a man suspected of being an undocumented immigrant who was also allegedly connected to a Venezuelan gang.
Okay, so that raises the stakes immediately. You've got an immigration enforcement stop, but it's heightened by this alleged link to organized crime, to a gang.
Precisely. Which, that raises the perceived danger level for the agents on the scene.
So what was their justification for opening fire?
It was very clear. Self-defense. According to the DHS statement, the agents claimed they opened fire because the driver of the vehicle tried to run them over.
Tried to run them over?
Yes. The spokesperson specifically quoted the agent, saying they fired a defensive shot, fearing for his life and safety. The statement then says that after the shot was fired, the driver just drove off with the passenger, fleeing the scene.
Which lines up with the PPB finding them miles away.
It does.
So that's the clean, official federal line. A high-stakes stop, targeting a gang suspect. The suspect uses their car as a weapon. The agent responds with justified self-defense, and then the suspects flee.
Yes. That's a very neat package. But this is where we really need to spend some time, because we have a direct, non-law enforcement witness account. And it offers a dramatically different perspective on the maneuvering of that vehicle.
Which is the whole justification.
It's the whole justification. The entire story hinges on it.
Okay, let's focus on that witness. This account is absolutely central to why the local community, it seems, immediately distrusted the federal story.
It really is. So this man was at the medical building, that Adventist hospital location, and he spoke to local media. He says he saw federal officers follow a Toyota truck into the office building parking lot and then actively try to corner it.
Corner it, not just pull it over.
Right. He also said he saw one officer pounding repeatedly on the driver's window, trying to, force compliance or maybe even pull the driver out of the truck.
Okay, that already changes the dynamic. This isn't a simple roadside traffic stop anymore. This is an aggressive, confined attempt to contain and subdue the driver inside their own vehicle.
It does. And then, describing the driver's attempt to get away, the witness said the driver backed up and moved forward at least a couple of times.
Back and forth.
Yes, and in the process, he strikes a car that was parked behind him before he finally manages to turn the truck and just speed off.
We have to pause here. This is a critical conflict in the narrative. The federal claim is the driver tried to run them over. If that's true, that is immediate lethal aggression. It pretty much unequivocally justifies an agent firing a defensive shot.
Absolutely.
But the witness account describes a driver backing up and moving forward, hitting a parked car behind him in what sounds like, well, it sounds like a frantic, maybe panicked effort to maneuver out of a cornered parking spot.
A flight-oriented response.
Right. Before finally speeding off. The legal and moral distinction there is just, it's immense.
It's huge. The federal claim imputes aggressive, lethal intent. Murderous intent, essentially.
Right.
The witness account suggests a panic-driven, reckless, maybe even dangerous, but ultimately a flight-oriented attempt to escape being confined.
So the core legal question, the one that any real investigation has to answer, is this. Does backing up and moving forward erratically, striking a parked car while federal agents are banging on your window, does that legally equate to the intent and action of trying to run them over?
That's the entire ballgame. Right there.
Yeah.
Now, if the agents were directly in the path of the vehicle during one of those forward maneuvers, the use of force could potentially be justified. But the witness's description of the vehicle striking a car behind it, that suggests the movement was focused on escape, not on direct engagement with the agents.
And just think about the tactical situation for a second. If the agents had successfully cornered this truck in a small parking lot, which the witness says they did,
Right.
then the driver's only real option to get out is lateral or rearward movement to break free.
Yeah.
Because it challenges that clean, simple explanation of a defensive shot.
And what's so fascinating here is how these two conflicting perspectives immediately shred the credibility of the federal report, and the fact that the two injured people drove 3 miles away and then called local police for help.
Instead of turning themselves into the feds.
Right. It just reinforces this narrative of panic and flight. And it deepens that local skepticism that the federal agents were acting purely in self-defense. This whole complication is exactly what the local officials in Portland seized on immediately.
That makes perfect sense. This narrative discrepancy is the foundation that the entire political explosion was built on.
And that fallout in Portland was. It was swift, it was intense, and it was profoundly critical of the federal government.
Well, this city has a history, right? This didn't just come out of nowhere.
Not at all. There is recent, deep historical tension there with federal law enforcement, particularly involving ICE and Border Patrol being present during earlier protests. This incident didn't happen in a vacuum. It landed on already very fertile ground for political mobilization.
And we saw that reflected right away in the statement from Portland Mayor Keith Wilson. I mean, his words were not diplomatic. They were accusatory. They spoke volumes about this fundamental breakdown of credibility.
They did. He said, "We know what the federal government says happened here. There was a time when we could take them at their word. That time is long past."
That time is long past. Wow.
That specific phrase, that's not just some casual political rhetoric. That is a declaration that the fundamental social contract of trust between the city of Portland and the Department of Homeland Security has completely failed.
It sends a signal.
A huge signal to the public, to the investigation. It says the DHS narrative will be presumed unreliable until there is external, verifiable evidence like video footage we're going to talk about to prove it. It completely flips the usual institutional burden of proof.
And the mayor's condemnation came with a specific, really powerful call to action.
He immediately called on IC and Border Patrol to end all operations in Portland.
All of them.
All operations, until a full, comprehensive, and objective investigation could be completed.
And how did he frame that demand?
He grounded it in this idea that Portland is not a training ground for militarized agents. Yeah. He's effectively characterizing this operation as reckless, overly aggressive, and deployed by personnel who might not be properly trained for these kinds of urban enforcement encounters. By using that phrase, militarized agents, he shifts the whole focus from simple law enforcement to state aggression against residents.
Which is a very powerful political frame for his audience.
Extremely powerful.
And the condemnation wasn't just from the mayor, it was widespread among the local leadership.
It was. We also heard from Maxine Dexter. She's the Democratic representative for the district where the shooting actually happened. And her perspective is particularly powerful because she's also a medical doctor.
Right. So she has that added credibility.
She does. And she was able to confirm that both of the injured people are alive, which was an immediate relief, of course. But she was quick to emphasize that the full extent of their injuries was still unknown.
And what was her take on the situation?
Her response was incredibly strong. She directly linked what happened to the systemic behavior of these agencies. She stated unequivocally that ICE has done nothing but inject terror, chaos, and cruelty into our communities.
Terror, chaos, and cruelty. That's strong language from an elected official.
It's about as strong as it gets. And coming from a doctor, a professional medical authority, it just demonstrates the gravity of the local perception of these agencies.
And she didn't stop there. She explicitly tied the agent's actions to the wider administration's political agenda.
She did. She said, Trump's immigration machine is using violence to control our communities straight out of the authoritarian playbook.
So she's elevating this. This isn't just a street shooting anymore. It's a constitutional concern about the political weaponization of federal force within local communities.
That's it, exactly. Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just local anger. It's a clear jurisdictional challenge coupled with a political theory about abuse of power. And just like Mayor Wilson, Representative Dexter had a clear demand about the investigation itself.
What was?
She demanded a comprehensive local police investigation, one that was free from Trump's interference, and she insisted that local law enforcement must be allowed to do its work.
And that demand for local control, it reveals a deep fear, doesn't it? A fear that any investigation led by a federal agency, especially the FBI, which reports up through the Department of Justice,
would prioritize protecting the federal agents involved.
right, and that it would compromise the ability to get to an objective, unbiased truth that the local community could actually trust.
It creates this powerful political standoff. Local leaders are saying, look, we don't trust the federal government to police itself, so we insist that our local police force, the one that's accountable to us, has to take the lead.
But as we're about to see, whether the federal government is willing to concede that power is another question entirely.
A whole other question.
And this pushback, it went all the way to the state level.
It did, and it provided a very personal voice of opposition. Casey Jama, an Oregon state senator, spoke out. His personal context here just gives his words incredible weight.
Why is that?
He's a refugee from Somalia, and he lives in the very neighborhood where this shooting took place.
Ah, wow.
So his experience allowed him to draw this really sharp contrast between his past and the present. He noted that the city he arrived in decades ago was welcoming, and he's suggesting that this kind of aggressive federal enforcement fundamentally changes the safety and the character of the community he now represents.
What did he say specifically?
His message to the federal agents was visceral. It was direct. He said, "This is Oregon. We do not need you. You are not welcome, and you need to get the hell out of our community."
That's the language of a community rejecting an occupation, not just questioning an investigation. It really speaks to the perceived threat that this federal presence generates for them.
Absolutely. And then finally, in the immediate aftermath, the focus very quickly shifted from condemnation to the hunt for objective evidence.
The video.
The video. Zakir Khan, who's a prominent Portland civil rights advocate, he zeroed in on the potential for definitive proof. He called on the hospital, which is part of the Oregon Health and Science University, to release any security camera footage of the incident as soon as possible.
And this demand is so crucial because it speaks directly back to that foundational conflict we talked about.
Right back to it.
The DHS claim of running them over versus the witness account of backing up and striking a car. Video is maybe the only thing that can definitively resolve that conflict and determine whether the use of lethal force was actually legally justified.
And the focus on the hospital security footage suggests that, the location of the stop and medical office parking lot was highly likely to be under surveillance.
Yeah.
In the absence of an official narrative that anyone trusts, that footage is seen by activists as the ultimate arbiter of the truth.
So its release becomes the immediate local demand for transparency.
It does. And this also sets the stage perfectly for our next segment, because the reason they are demanding this video so urgently is because of what had happened just 24 hours earlier in Minneapolis.
Yeah, the Portland shooting absolutely did not happen in isolation. It was the second major high-profile incident involving federal immigration officers.
In 2 days.
In 2 days, in two different major U.S. cities. And that other incident in Minneapolis, it just significantly heightened the emotional temperature, and maybe more importantly, it set a dangerous jurisdictional precedent for how Portland's case was going to be handled.
Let's just underscore that. The shooting in Portland happened just 1 day after a federal immigration officer fatally shot 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
So this rapid sequence of events, according to our sources, it sparked sharp condemnation and raised fears of increasing tensions. It really looked like a pattern of aggressive federal conduct was accelerating. And that's precisely why the battles over who controlled the investigation in Minneapolis became so critical. It was like a playbook for what Portland should expect and what local officials there were trying desperately to avoid. What happened there with jurisdiction was highly revealing.
So the Minneapolis case immediately just devolved into this major fight between federal and state authorities.
A huge fight. On Thursday, the very same day as the Portland shooting, the FBI took control of the investigation into the killing in Minneapolis.
Okay.
And critically, the state police agency, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA, which is usually the one responsible for investigating serious law enforcement actions in the state.
They got shut out.
They said their access to case materials, to witnesses, to evidence, had been revoked by the federal government.
Revoked. So the state was essentially cut out of the primary investigation, even though a civilian was killed in their jurisdiction by a federal agent operating on their streets.
Exactly. And this is more than just some procedural squabble. When the FBI takes control of an investigation that involves federal agents, the state loses its ability to subpoena those agents. It loses its ability to manage the evidence chain or to pursue state-level criminal charges. Accountability is then managed entirely within the federal system.
Which, regardless of the outcome, immediately fuels public distrust.
Immediately. It's the core of the fight then. It's about maintaining state sovereignty and public confidence versus the federal government just asserting control over its own employees.
And this led to a very public dispute.
Oh, yeah. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, she publicly denied that the BCA was cut out. She claimed it was just a matter of jurisdiction, that federal protocol dictates that a federal agency, usually the FBI, investigates federal employees.
But the state pushed back.
Hard. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was defiant. He told a news conference that the state must be part of this investigation. He recognized that excluding the state police just completely compromised the public's perception of objectivity.
And the friction over jurisdiction alone was enough to raise alarms, but the conflicting stories coming out of Minneapolis were just as stark.
They were, and they provided a crucial lesson for activists in Portland. Challenge the official narrative and challenge it immediately.
So what was the federal story in Minneapolis?
It was incredibly aggressive. The Trump administration moved fast to justify the deadly shooting by accusing the victim, Renee Nicole Good, of an act of domestic terrorism.
Domestic terrorism.
Yes, and they claimed the ICE agent acted in self-defense. This narrative was, it was designed to criminalize the deceased victim in order to justify the use of force.
But there was a problem with that story.
A huge problem. The key detail that just undercut this entire federal narrative was the existence of visual evidence. The administration's aggressive story was, and I'm quoting, at odds with video footage of the incident which has been widely shared online.
So that video footage is the critical variable.
It's everything. In Minneapolis, the public had a widely circulated visual counter-narrative to the official federal claim, and that empowered state leaders and the community to challenge the administration's story with hard evidence. The existence of that video fundamentally changed the dynamics of public trust and accountability.
And it showed the community in Portland exactly what they needed to do.
Exactly what they needed to pursue to counter the DHS claim.
So connecting back to Portland, what was the official status of that investigation, given the really strong demands from Mayor Wilson and Representative Dexter for local control?
Unfortunately for those local leaders, the precedent that was set in Minneapolis was immediately followed in Oregon.
So the feds took over.
Portland Police Chief Bob Day confirmed it. He said, "This is a federal investigation. It's being led by the FBI. Despite all the forceful demands for local control, the federal government had asserted its exclusive jurisdiction right away."
That's so significant. It means the local officials' stated mistrust of the federal narrative is now directly paired with their complete lack of investigative control.
It perfectly mirrors the frustrations of Governor Walz and the BCA in Minnesota. It's this powerful cycle of distrust that's reinforced by the perceived lack of local power.
And we have to keep remembering that Portland has this unique recent history of friction that just amplifies all of this. This wasn't the first time federal agencies had dramatically escalated tensions in that city. Portland saw months of massive protest just the year before, all centered on that ICE holding facility in the city's downtown.
And those protests were characterized by these intense, almost nightly confrontations between local police, protesters, and very often federal agents who were already there.
Right.
And the sources recall the attempt by Donald Trump to deploy National Guard members to the city in response to those protests, an effort that was eventually held up in the courts.
So the community was already organized.
Organized, mobilized, and deeply sensitive to any kind of aggressive federal presence before the shooting even occurred. This historical context is why the local demands for ICE to just leave were so instantaneous and so intense. They saw this shooting as the inevitable, tragic outcome of an ongoing political deployment of federal power.
So given this already volatile atmosphere, you've got 2 federal shootings in 2 days, you've got this strong political condemnation, a protest movement that's basically ready to go. The immediate concern among state and city leaders was, what, just preventing this from escalating?
Preventing an escalation into major street violence or riots. That was the #1 concern.
And we saw specific, very urgent pleas for restraint almost instantly.
We did. Senator Jeff Merkley, who's a Democrat representing Oregon, he urged protesters to remain calm in light of the shooting. And his warning was remarkably correct. It was almost like a tactical political instruction.
He used incredibly provocative language. He said publicly, Trump wants to generate riots. Don't take the bait. That's a political leader explicitly suggesting that these federal actions aren't just accidental, but that they could be designed to provoke a violent reaction from people.
A reaction that could then be used to justify even further, more aggressive federal intervention.
So it frames the community's reaction as this test of strategic political restraint. The senator is basically telling protesters, if you riot, you are playing directly into the administration's hand.
Exactly. And the Portland police chief, Bob Day, he echoed those pleas. He recognized the heightened emotion and tension that was stemming directly from the Minneapolis shooting the day before. He specifically asked the community to remain calm as we work to learn more.
This coordinated message of de-escalation, of telling people to channel their anger productively, it went beyond just the politicians and the police.
It did. The city government itself took visible public action to try and manage the narrative.
How so?
Our sources noted that a banner was placed very prominently right at the top of the Portland city government website, and it advised residents, respond with calm and purpose.
That's striking. For a city government to put up a banner that's less, generic civic advice and more a tactical warning to its own citizens.
It's basically saying, be calm, be organized, do not give them the visuals they want.
And despite these really strong, highly political pleas for calm, the public response was immediate. It was visible on Thursday evening. But it manifested in a couple of different ways.
It did.
What did the protests look like at first?
Well, the initial reaction, you saw about 100 protesters gather outside City Hall, right in downtown Portland. Their message was conventional. It was clear. They were chanting the popular slogan, abolish IC.
So it shows that the root cause of the conflict, the very role and existence of these immigration enforcement agencies, was the immediate catalyst for them to mobilize.
Absolutely. And then we saw a secondary, separate gathering at the actual location that's been the focus of so much of this historical tension in the city.
The ICE facility itself.
Yes. A smaller number of protesters went back to the ICE facility in South Portland. And what makes this gathering memorable, what really stands out in the source material, is a very specific and surprising detail.
What's that?
Many of them were dressed in the animal costumes that have helped diffuse tensions in recent months.
The animal costumes. That is a fascinating piece of sociological detail and protest strategy.
It really is.
You have a large group focused on this intense political chanting downtown, but then a smaller group at the actual site of friction is employing this unique, almost absurdist tactic. What's the significance of the costumes in this kind of highly charged environment?
Well, it speaks to a really sophisticated, calculated awareness of optics and risk management among the protest organizers. When Senator Merkley warns people not to take the bait, he's warning them against providing visuals of violence or destruction or chaos that the federal government could then use to justify a heavier, more militarized response.
And animal costumes, just by their very nature, they inject absurdity and humor into a confrontational situation. They're kind of the antithesis of the black bloc tactics that are often associated with escalating these street confrontations.
Exactly. They are a deliberate counter tactic to prevent federal agents from being able to classify the crowd as a violent or an imminent physical threat. They strip away that militant persona, and they make it much harder for law enforcement to deploy high levels of force.
So it effectively lowers the chances of a physical crackdown.
It does. It's an example of active, calculated restraint coming from the movement itself. They're trying to keep the focus purely on the policy demand to abolish IC, while at the same time denying the administration the visual evidence of a riot that could discredit their whole movement.
So the combination of the intense political chanting downtown, which is aimed at mobilizing political support, and then this symbolic, diffused, costumed presence at the physical location of the federal facility, it shows a sophisticated kind of bifurcated approach to leveraging public outrage while also managing the risk of violence.
It highlights the strategic depth of the protest movement in Portland. This is a movement that has learned from its previous confrontations, and it's actively looking for ways to resist the federal presence without falling into that trap of escalation.
They're managing the tension themselves, recognizing that their own political leaders are also pleading for that same restraint.
Exactly right.
So as we kind of synthesize all the sources from this single incredibly tense day, the central story that really emerges isn't just about a shooting. It's about a profound institutional breakdown in the United States. We've seen, I think, 3 key tensions emerge from all this detailed reporting.
The first one is the most direct. It's that unresolvable conflict over the basic facts of the shooting itself.
Right.
You have the DHS narrative of agents fearing for their lives, claiming the driver trying to run them over.
Right.
And then you have the non-law enforcement witness account describing a panicking driver backing up, striking a parked car, just trying to flee a cornered situation.
And the difference between those two stories, It determines everything. It determines whether a life-threatening shot to the chest was justified or whether it was an excessive use of force.
And the second tension is that immediate and, frankly, complete crisis of trust between the local authorities and the federal government.
Yeah. Mayor Wilson's statement that the time when they could take the federal government at its word is long past. That's the definitive quote here.
It is. And it's paired with those specific demands from local leaders for IC to just halt all of its operations. It signals a deep systemic rejection of federal authority in their community.
And finally, the third tension is that crucial jurisdictional battle, state versus federal. It was so powerfully highlighted by the precedent that was set in the Minneapolis case.
Right. Despite all the demands from local and state officials, the FBI asserted its control over both investigations. It just overrode the need for local input. And that reinforces the local perception that the federal government is prioritizing institution control, maybe even self-justification, over objective, transparent accountability.
And this brings us right back to the one element that consistently came up as the potential solution to all of these tensions: video evidence. In Minneapolis, video footage contradicted the official narrative, and it forced the administration onto the defensive. In Portland, the civil rights advocate immediately demanded that the hospital release any security camera footage.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this, trying to navigate this world of conflicting information?
I think it means that in these high-stakes investigations, the ones led by powerful agencies, public trust is just. It's no longer tied to official press releases or sworn testimony alone. The public and the local political leaders, they have now learned that visual evidence, the footage from a security camera, the video from a bystander's cell phone, is the single most influential, most objective factor that can challenge an official narrative.
Regardless of how quickly or how forcefully that narrative is presented.
So the point for you to kind of mull over is this. In the modern era of government conflict, the battle for accountability is often decided not in the courtrooms, not through some bureaucratic review, but in the parking lot where the cameras are installed.
And the absence, or even just the delay, of that objective external evidence guarantees that the deep mistrust articulated by Portland's leaders will persist. And that makes genuine cooperation between local communities and federal agencies increasingly impossible. That tension between the assertion of authority and the objective gaze of the camera, that's where the real power lies today.